Session 3, Wisdom of the Elders. We talked about Yellowstone, again, initially, of course, was just a commons open for exploitation. Then the Army was brought in to manage, and we had John Stoddard's book, which some of you picked up. And then we had scientific management with the creation of the Park Service in 1916. And it's taking over management in 1919. And it managed with basically the doctrine of what was called scientific management, which was an extremely elitist approach to managing a very complex and changing system. And applying bureaucracy to ecology is inherently unstable. And so lots and lots of, well, lots of problems, but three major problems that we will deal with eventually developed. And they involved, first, scientific management suggested or demanded that we exterminate, Park Service, exterminate the predators. So that eliminated, of course, the wolf, mainly. Also took out a lot of lions. The explosion of the elk population, we've been over that, and went from an estimated carrying capacity 6,000 to 9,000 to something in excess of 32,000 that had huge implications. Another one was, of course, feeding the bear, and we're going to have some films on that, videos on that today, little snippets, and also putting out fires within 24 hours. And that, of course, led to a huge accumulation of fuel, and then ultimately to the rather substantial fires of 1988. What we found was general recognition that these were serious problems that had serious consequences. However, each of these problems developed a constituency. And the constituency basically put leverage on the Park Service to maintain these policies. And it's sort of easy to understand why ranchers surrounding the park, or even some distance from the park, would be extremely reluctant to have the wolves reintroduced. I mean, I've had multiple ranchers tell me, because we supported, even though we raised a lot of sheep, we supported the reintroduction of the wolf. And we had several ranchers, pounding the table saying, what do you not understand about this? My grandfather spent much of his life killing those bastards, and now you want to put him back. And so we have multiple bureaucracies. We have political organizations like the wool growers, which we were involved, the stock growers, in which we were also involved. And they have, of course, good representation at every political level. Yet, these were problems, the three that we've discussed, that everyone in the agency, at least, understood was, in fact, a problem. So how do we overcome that? Well, they overcame those problems through, basically, high human capital. People mainly, but not exclusively, in the agency, meaning mainly the Park Service, who were smart, they were culturally sensitive, they understood the political context, and they had a reputation for integrity. In other words, people believed them when they said something. Okay, so Bob Barbee, 42 years in the Park Service, superintendent of Yellowstone for 11 years, and just an all-around good guy. He'd been a superintendent of a number of parks, I think it was 4. And so Jerry Johnson and I, with foundation funding, put together a set of interviews that involved people who you will see portions of. Okay, so here's Bob Barbee telling you his account of dealing with some of these problems.
Well, I came to Yellowstone in basically the job was offered to me in 1982. I was in Redwood National Park, and the director had called me and said, you know, we think you could do this. What do you think? And I said, oh, sure. You know, I don't know. I'd give it a shot. And so he said, well, there's a rub. I said, there's always a rub. Now, this is a true story. I said, what's the rub? And he said, the rub is that James Watt wants to interview personally our nominee for this job. I said, well, that finishes me off right away. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, here I am in Redwood National Park, a fairly well-known liberal, and belong to all these liberal organizations when they do some background checks. And I said, I won't. Well, he said, it doesn't hurt to try. I said, okay. So I wore a dark blue suit, red tie, power tie, and got my hair cut short. I didn't have real long hair, but it was longer than it is now. Got my hair cut short. In my lapel, I wore my rotary pin to support, as a symbolic support for the laissez-faire. Okay? And off to Washington I went. Up I go to the secretary's office. It's a palatial place. If you've ever been there, it gets your attention right away. And he welcomed me in, and we had a really nice conversation. He never once asked me about anything that would get into partisanship or any other political view, never once. And he said, well, good luck. And I thought, God, I've got the job.
Jim Watt received several environmental awards. Sierra Club gave him an award, the Wilderness Society gave him an award for increasing their membership, because he was viewed as basically the environmental devil. But Watt was, before he became the Secretary of Interior, he was the head of the Mountain States Legal Foundation, which is based in Denver. Mountain States Legal basically made a career, not entirely, but their basic mission was to oppose environmental regulation and environmental oversight by agencies. And so the head of that organization came in to be Secretary of Interior. And Bob, who's has a reputation of being obviously a strong proponent of wildlife and habitat, had to have this interview, of course, with Jim Watt to have his approval. And let me say, I'm a biased observer because I understand that Jim Watt blackballed me for the Council on Environmental Quality. I'm not sure that's true, but several people close to him told me that that was the case. And I was very lucky. I would not have done well in D.C. I would not have done well at all. So, thank you, Jim. And that's who we're talking about. The interview process that Barbie is talking about is standard procedure. One always goes through that. When they bring you to Washington, they take you around to meet with your senators and your representative and so forth, to have them sprinkle holy water on you. When I went there, Max Baucus was a senator, and he had been to Ramona and my wedding much earlier. And he said, oh, John, I'm really glad you're up for this appointment. He says, I'll say what, I'll really strongly support you. He says, wait a minute. On the other hand, if it's helpful to you, I will very mildly oppose you. Whatever you think works.
In fact, Malcolm Wallop, Senator Wallop, when he was chairman of the Senate Energy and Natural Resource, he was the guy. Looked at me and said, Bob, this is the craziest idea I have ever heard.
What he's talking about there is the beginning of the discussion of reintroducing the wolves. This is just the beginning. And so Malcolm Wallop was a senator from Wyoming.
Now, what do you really think? And I thought, what I'm really thinking, I wish I wasn't sitting here right now trying to answer that question, because of course I don't agree with you. And but he always remained a friend. And and you know that there are completely unreasonable people out there. I mean, some of these people are words don't describe them, and you know what I'm talking about. And wolves can get, or that type of, wolves can create more antipathy quicker than anything I've ever dealt with. And believe me, I caught a lot of flack when we were doing the politics. We had wonderful people doing the technical stuff, getting all the documentation in place, and so on. I just dealt with the politicians, and some of them were unreasonable, but not all of them.
I've never met anyone within the Park Service, in the Yellowstone, involved with Yellowstone or Western Parks, who was not in favor of the wolf reintroduction. I mean, the one question was the degree to which they anticipated problems that would flow from reintroducing wolves, and they were obviously quite large.
Like many issues that are hard for us to deal with, we just can't, because the politically is not possible, for one thing. We can't pull it off. So what you tend to do is go outside the organization, where most change is initiated. Go outside the organization and see if you can get a blue ribbon committee going with some powerful people on it, and they can help. They can help carry the day.
Bob he died quite recently, but he is one of the elders who had really great wisdom. And what he's talking about now illustrates how important it is for someone in a position such as that to be able to recognize and work with, to coordinate outside groups, because they can do things that anyone inside an agency cannot do. And I don't know the specific groups to whom he's referring, but we know the kind of a group. He would be, the various pro-predator groups, that most of which seem to be based in Bozeman. I don't know if they were at that time, but that's what he's talking about, mobilizing people who have access to various people within government or within interest groups.
And Starker Leopold was one of those people, and he chaired a committee which basically brought about a renaissance in natural resource management, including fire protection, including not just wildlife management, but natural resource management. A combination of words that in my career early on didn't exist. We didn't have natural resource managers. We had, there's always a bear management guy around, and I say guys because there were no women except in the office.
There were no women. Ramona and I don't remember the meeting, but it was fairly recently, and at that meeting was a woman who was one of the very first people hired as non-clerical workers in the in Yellowstone. I don't know about the entire Park Service. Well, I think it was in the entire Park Service. And she said they had problems dealing with women. And the most important and most immediate thing that came up with was, what do they wear? Because they're not going to wear the Ranger outfit of the time, which was basically based on the Army uniform. And so they were experimenting with a variety of things. One of the models, remember perhaps you've seen pictures of Pan Am American Airlines stewardesses? Well, they had their uniform adopted to be a park ranger uniform in terms of the colors and all. And now, she was one of the first 3 or 4 who was appointed in the entire Park Service, and especially as interpretive rangers. And she says now the vast majority of interpretive rangers throughout the entire Park Service are female.
There certainly are now. It's a good thing. But anyway, going outside the organization and getting help on the outside, including from advocacy groups. And because a lot of those people tend to be true believers. And true believers are not rewarded by the bureaucracy. And they're not looked upon with great favor because they're zealous. And they really believe in what they're doing, but you don't want too many of them on your staff because they'll take you down, and at least in my opinion. But they're fine outside. They're fine.
True believers, whether they're in the agency, and there are some of those in the agency, or those on the outside who are absolutely convinced of their position, and no amount of data, no amount of scientific literature will move them one way or the other, because they know the truth or what the truth should be. That's what he's talking about. And being in his position, you meet a lot of them, for sure.
There certainly are now. It's a good thing. But anyway, going outside the organization and getting help on the outside, including from advocacy groups. And because a lot of those people tend to be true believers. And true believers are not rewarded by the bureaucracy. And they're not looked upon with great favor because they're zealous. And they really believe in what they're doing, but you don't want too many of them on your staff because they'll take you down, and at least in my opinion. But they're fine outside. They're fine. And you can sit there and let them rant and rave like sometimes they do about our incompetence or or whatever. And and so blue ribbon committees, that sort of thing can work in your favor. They can also work against you. That's why there was a law passed that prevents us from going out and on our own initiative, getting an advocacy group, so to speak, or some advocate. And they were proliferating. We were helping proliferate them.
So let's move to the next set of interviews, which are with John Varley, who is chief scientist at Yellowstone he was a scientist at Yellowstone for most of his career, and chief scientist for, again, a fairly substantial period, nearly a decade, I believe. And here's John Varley, same location.
I mean, we see how far they range today. My Lord, they're down in New Mexico now. Yellowstone wolves are in New Mexico and in California and Oregon, and yeah, you know, they perform some amazing feats of looking for a mate and a herd of elk, and so I think he said he could read the public opinion, and the public opinion, whether it be by state or nationally, was overwhelmingly in favor of restoring wolves to Yellowstone. And man, that's a big hurdle to get over when you're trying for a change, major change in policy, is getting public support. Well, we had the public support. Now we just had to line up the politicians in some way, and Senator McClure in 1991 did that. We showed up at a hearing, a Senate hearing in Washington D.C., and heard the 2 Wyoming senators get up and back down from everything they told us privately and publicly, and told the livestock industry that this is coming down the pike. Now, you can be in on the rulemaking associated with this, or you can sit back on your saddles and do it like it's always been done and just say no wolves. Well, you're not going to get that.
He was saying, look, basically, we believe the wolves are going to be reintroduced. You can either ignore this issue, or you can come in while we're setting the rules, the administrative regulations and so forth for dealing with the wolves. It's sort of your choice. Either ignore it, as you've been doing, or come in and help set up the management arrangements.
What you had was a loggerheads from some outside researchers, Frank and John Craighead on one side, and Park Service biologists on the other. And they disagreed vehemently about how to go about bringing the grizzly bear back.
Yeah, we've moved from wolves to bears.
And I probably won't do justice to either side in characterizing it this way, but it was something like the Craighead brothers wanted the garbage dumps to be reopened to save the grizzly bear. Or a little bit later, it became not garbage dumps as much as it was a concentrated protein source. And the Park Service, on the other hand, had the notion that the bears will work it out. They will learn how to deal with their natural foods in the absence of any human foods, including garbage. So there were in 1972 there were grenades and howitzers going back and forth, and everybody had to choose a side, and I considered myself an objective observer then, and so I went about my fish work. Well, one of the things that I did was go into the backcountry and survey backcountry lakes and streams, and that's what I did the first summer. The Craighead brothers believed that there were only 173 bears left, grizzly bears, and that they were on a downward trajectory and would be extinct. I don't remember the year, but by 1985 or something, 1990, something like that. And the Park Service said, no, we have faith in the bear. They will find new food sources or old traditional food sources, and they'll be fine. And that first summer, I in the backcountry, I ran into seven grizzly bears. So you couldn't convince me that there was a real shortage. I felt kind of unlucky, or lucky, as depending upon your viewpoint. But I followed the controversy really closely, and then later in my career, when I became the park's chief of research, then I was actually a part of the bureaucratic apparatus to recover the bear, which happened. Which now they're talking about delisting the bears. Something like 700 bears in the greater Yellowstone, and doing great, and they're talking about delisting them. Well, gosh, if anybody has copies of old news tapes, when people ask me when we were going to delist the bears, when the National Park Service was going to delist the bears, then I would say probably not in my lifetime. And I feel my lifetime is getting short. So it was an overall success story, but it was a monumental effort on the part of management on one side and science on the other that got the job done.
Now, the hotels in and around the park, they had a major problem with simply dealing with garbage. I mean, there's just a huge amount of garbage is produced. And when I say garbage, I mean food scraps and, just, we're not talking trash, we're talking about food garbage. And so the easy and wonderful thing from their standpoint to do is, my goodness gracious, it costs us a huge amount to truck this stuff up and dispose of it, in the Logan landfill or wherever. So why not just let the bears eat it? That does two things. Number one, it saves us the problem of disposing of this garbage, but also it's a tourist attraction. Doug Smith is a wolf biologist, and he's been involved with the reintroduction of the wolf since very early in his career.
Yellowstone really was not a natural system without the top predator. Yes, it did have bears, but bear numbers were reduced through the middle part of the 20th century for various reasons. But as Bob Barbie so eloquently said, there were good animals and bad animals. And wolves led the list of bad animals. But cougars were eliminated, coyotes were reduced, people went after bobcat, lynx, wolverine, all predators, as Bob said, those animals that bit something.
And scientific management said, look, there are good animals and bad animals, and so the thing to do, of course, is to get rid of the bad animals.
But wolves were the worst. And wolves arguably had the biggest impact on the system because they were the dominant carnivore in North America. And there's a lot of science to support that. Cougars aren't as widespread. Bears are primarily omnivores. Wolves were the big one. And Yellowstone didn't have them. And so how could we call this a natural system? How could we as Park Service people say that we were hewing or adhering to our mission? And so it took a lot. And what was more important, it was that this was possibly, despite what I just said, maybe more about human attitudes and cultural norms than ecology. Now that's oftentimes what we did, is we presented this ecological picture and we presented this Endangered Species Act made us do it, this policy argument for the Park Service, but we were fighting this other battle. And this is the battle of the Old West, the mystique of the cowboy, and who doesn't love that? And it's still very much in place. But you're taking on the gunslinging guy on his quarter horse who rid this land of these predators so we could have cows on it, and in some places sheep. That's what that guy did. And you're telling me that you're going to reverse this whole thing and you're going to bring back this toothy critter that might kill some sheep and cows, and it will also kill my elk and deer. And you're going to do that, and you're going to tell me this is Park Service policy and federal government policy. And that's where the fire-breathing dragon started. And as Bob Barbie also said, he's never seen an issue more volatile than wolves.
But, it turns out that many of the people who took this strong, anti-wolf position are dead, and they aren't being replaced, at least in any significant numbers. I mean, there's just there's been a cultural shift. such people understand the basic argument that Doug Smith just advanced. You know, the system was way out of whack. It was way out of act by the intent of Park Service policy, and we worked to correct that.
Yeah, I think there's more tolerance for grizzly bears in greater Yellowstone and the northern Continental Divide ecosystem. That's partly because people have learned that they don't track us down and eat us. That was the common belief for centuries, ever since Lewis and Clark first came through. They came back with horrendous bear stories about fights that they picked in almost every instance, and picked a fight with a big bear with a bad weapon. And they went back to the east with these stories, and they grew hair and got bigger as time went on. And those stories became the wisdom of the elders. Everybody knew the bears were out to get you. And it's still, you know, like the Colbert Report. He's got a standard joke about being mauled by a bear, his greatest fear. We've learned in the West anyway that we have more bears. Attacks on humans are rare. Almost everybody survives. When I started researching bear attacks, that surprised me, that almost everybody survives. This is an animal that can kill an Angus steer or a bull elk, but they let people get up and walk away. And most of those people come out humbled. They're grateful to be alive. I've met very few of the dozens of attack survivors that I've interviewed. Very few bear a grudge against bears. Some may have a grudge against an individual bear, but not as a species. Most of them are, when they're still in the ambulance litter, are saying, "Don't kill the bear." Because that has happened in many instances where government officials come in and kill a bear that's attacked a person. Another thing that I think has helped is the common use of bear spray. It's become accepted. It's affordable. You don't need great skills. A lot of gun nuts still say, "No, I want my gun." A grizzly bear coming at me from 40 feet, I'd rather have some bear spray than a handgun. It's more effective. There's been several studies to prove that it's effective, and that's becoming common knowledge. And it costs $40 for a can of bear spray, as opposed to however many hundreds you want to spend on a firearm. And you don't need great skill. Anybody can use it. Just familiarize yourself with the product. Also, people have learned how to live with bears, how to keep them away from their homes. The communities near the parks have done a good job of removing attractants like garbage, horse feed, dog food, bird feeders. But as the grizzly population expands, more and more people have to learn how to do that. Bears are coming out of the northern Continental Divide. They're heading to the prairie. They're heading to their ancestral homelands in the wide open prairies. And people on the Sun River and Marias River are still where the folks were in Gardner 30 years ago, where, what, you're telling me I can't feed my dog on the porch? You know, I gotta lock up my garbage? I mean, what are you talking about? And so there's a lot of public education that needs to occur as the bears move east from the Rocky Mountain habitats.
Well, you know, inherently within the mission of the National Park Service, you have to balance the preservation of resources with allowing for appropriate visitor use, and immediately those come into conflict. But when you look at the National Park Service overall, we have a series of missions in conflict. What do you do in Yellowstone National Park between a National Historic Landmark of Fort Yellowstone and a natural resources of Mammoth Hot Springs, which continues to move and is moving towards those resources? Where and how do you make a decision about if you're going to protect a historic feature in terms of the first stone structure ever to be built in Yellowstone National Park that housed the U.S. magistrate since 1896? or do you impede in some way to protect that, the natural advancement of Mammoth Hot Springs? And so that's, you have values and conflicts between resources. You have also values and conflict between visitor use and resource preservation. We had 4.1 million visits last year. My personal opinion, I don't have the science yet, but I'm going to get it, is that that level of visitation affects two things. It affects the visitor experience in a negative way, and it also affects our ability to protect the resources. So what we have to do is we have to get the science. The only way you can make decisions that are going to stick in the National Park Service is making those decisions based on fidelity to the law, first and foremost, sound science, best available sound science, and long-term public interest. The long-term public interest, first and foremost at Yellowstone, will always be protection of this place. Visitation, if the two things come in conflict between protection of this place and visitor use and enjoyment, this superintendent, and I think my predecessors, have erred on the side of we're going to protect this place because you can't put it back.